Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2022 Canadian Open Data Summit. And this is a presentation related to venture capital, entrepreneurship, data, financial management, basically how data drives a lot of decision-making when starting a business and managing resources such as your finances. My name is Stuart Brown, and I am the instructor for this session. Just a little bit of background about myself. I'm the CEO of PiCap, which is a venture capital firm with 12 companies in our portfolio. And we are also registered with the federal government as a startup visa designated organization, which basically means we can facilitate the immigration of entrepreneurs from all over the world into Canada and house them in our incubator for 6 months and help get them permanent residency and help their business get off the ground. I'm also the Chief Financial Officer and co-founder of ChargerQuest, which is a leading electric vehicle infrastructure company. I'm also on the investment committee of an Ontario government-backed fund with about 350 million in assets under management. And I am an adjunct professor for an MBA, Master Finance, and BBA courses at Canada's top-ranking business schools, including the Schulich School of Business and the University of Toronto, and have been nominated for the Best Part-Time Instructor of the Year for 2 years in a row at the Schulich School of Business. So the agenda for today is as follows. We're going to discuss a background of how to use data within various types of businesses, and we're going to look at a couple of case studies, ones that I have experienced myself. Then we're going to discuss the stages of a startup's life cycle or an internal project. We're going to look at the increasing shareholder and project value of ventures that you might be embarking on, and how data can be used to provide critical insights in terms of decision making to maximize your probability of success or impact and de-risk the chances of failure as much as possible. Then we're going to take a small break, and then we're going to continue on and talk about the cash flow risk dynamics of early stage projects and ventures, as well as data-driven financial decision making as well. Okay, now I'm going to look at some background and case studies. So with PiCap, here essentially is the list of companies within our portfolio. As you can see, there is the electric vehicle infrastructure company, ChargerQuest, that I mentioned, and a number of other ones. And all of these tech companies all use data on their own in order to provide information to their users, but also to help drive decision making.
Okay, so here's a case study, and I just want to show how data-driven decisions could help you make your project or company successful. So with ChargerQuest, you can see the map there. So I'll just tell you about our business model. Essentially, what we do is we partner with what we call host business partners. So we buy these EV charging stations, we import them from Taiwan, and then we'll partner with a property manager. So someone who owns a hotel or a parking facility or a shopping mall. And then we say to them, look, we are going to pay for everything. We're going to put this unit on your property. We're going to pay for the installation. We're going to cover the maintenance. We're going to own that asset. But what we're going to do as a partnership kind of structure is all of the revenue we generate from those electric vehicle charging stations, we're going to share it with you, the host business partners. We'll give you 20%. And so we have received a massive backlog of interest from all of these hotels all across the country, all of these shopping malls, all of these parking facilities. And remember, with our business structure, the fact that we're paying for everything up front, that's a massive CapEx or capital expenditure. And we don't have a ton of money. Like, we raised over $4 million, which is amazing. But then, of course, we don't have hundreds of millions of dollars to deploy these charging stations everywhere and anywhere. So we have to be very selective on who we partner with for this strategy. And we use data to help figure that out. Like we asked ourselves, how many heads and beds does this hotel have? If it's a shopping mall, where's the close proximity to the nearest highway? How many people pass through that highway? So we analyze all these different details, and then we rank all of these host business partners, prospective ones, and we say, okay, these ones at the top will give us the best bang for our buck. If we pay for all of these things, install it, and do everything else, we're going to have a way higher hit rate. Actually, I shouldn't use the word hit when I'm talking about vehicles driving and what have you, but we'll have a higher bang for our buck. More users will use our charging stations, will generate more revenue, and then everyone will be happy. Okay, so this is the Ontario government-backed fund that I'm a part of, OCI. And you just look at the stats below there. And it's kind of interesting because being on their investment committee, I could always tell when their fiscal year is about to end, because all of a sudden, OCI will start ramming companies towards me and saying, Stuart, can you analyze this business? Can you analyze that business? Because we're considering making an investment. And for those of you who understand how it works in government, when you have a pool of capital that was given to you, you don't want to have that capital sitting around when it's the end of your fiscal year. You want to deploy all of that so you can prove to the government entity that's providing you that capital that you actually need it. And you're going to need it again in the next year to do more good. And to back up the use case and the success that the fund has been having for the last 7 years that I've been a part of it is the data that they collect from all of these companies. So what's important to the government? Obviously, employment, gross domestic product, tax revenue. And so they have hundreds of companies in their portfolio, and they're constantly getting that data to prove to the Ontario government that they should continue funding them. Okay. All right, so now I just want to kind of set the stage in terms of what we're looking to do within this lecture. I'm trying to kind of do a data dump into your brains in terms of how to make a company successful. And you know what? You'll find me doing this within this lecture, and my students know this very well when I teach them in the Master of Finance program and MBA school, that I always try to encourage entrepreneurs to look at their company or their project like it is an asset they're investing in. Too often, entrepreneurs think of their business idea like this idea is synonymous with myself. I've told all of my friends and family about it. If my business idea is not successful, that means I'm not successful. But if you want to take the scientific approach, and I know we have a data scientist in the room, at least one of them, you should look at your business like it's a hypothesis. The idea of your company is a hypothesis. It is not synonymous with yourself. And what do scientists do with a hypothesis? They test it. So the key thing is to go into the market and test your hypothesis and validate if your business idea is successful or not. And if it's not, you don't, say, I'm terrible as an entrepreneur, I'm a failure, entrepreneurship isn't for me. Because what does a scientist do after they find out that their hypothesis test is not validated? They come up with a new hypothesis. So the mantra from Silicon Valley with all of these successful tech companies is fail fast and fail often. Because the more you fail and the faster you fail, the theory is, when you think of statistics, as long as you learn from each failure, the closer you're going to get to having a successful business idea that can be validated by the market, and that will have the best chances of success. So here's the life cycle curve of successful companies. So if you focus on the stages launch to what they call shakeout or maturity, in venture capital world, we refer to the curve between those two periods as the hockey stick curve. Has anyone heard of that hockey stick curve saying before? Okay. If you start embarking further and further into your aspirations of entrepreneurship, you're going to hear that coming up over and over again. So when you trying to get, oh, the laser, okay, it's not showing up on the screen. Okay, so for in the beginning of the hockey stick curve, the blade, that is your lowest growth stage, other than, you know, maturity and what have you, of course. That is the riskiest time of a company's life. That's the startup phase. You're in survival mode. Something I'm going to show you later on in this lecture is where the cumulative cash flow measures out to a company when it's in that stage. But when the blade meets the handle of the hockey stick curve, that's the critical inflection point where you have not just validated your value proposition, but you validated your entire business model. It's the most exciting point of an entrepreneur's life cycle, because now you've just crystallized what your business is. You're graduating from discovery mode and shifting into execution mode, where you no longer have to figure out what is your business. The market is telling you what the business is. The demand is there. People are willing to pay money for what you're offering them because it's so compelling. And at that point, you just double down. It's like dumping gas on a fire. You want to get this thing growing as big as possible. Okay, so here's kind of a timeline between the two stages of a business's life. When you're in startup stage versus established business stage, they're as different as a caterpillar versus a butterfly. It's the same organism, it's the same creature, but it looks different. It talks differently, it walks different, it eats different. Everything about it is different. And the reason why I use that analogy is to emphasize the fact that when you're in startup phase, you have to accept the fact that you are in discovery mode. If the businesses that fail, honestly, the ones that are in that 90% category, it's because they think of their business idea as already validated. They think, okay, this business idea is really good. I'm a smart person. I came up with this idea, so it must work. My friends and family say it's a good idea and that I should pursue it. Therefore, I'm just going to put it into action. In fact, that's a paradigm that we've all kind of been brought up to believe. To create a business, you come up with an idea, then you do a ton of research, you create a business plan, then you put the business plan into action. You need products, you need money, you need marketing, you need all of this infrastructure around you to sell something. But in the world of lean startup methodology, and the most successful tech companies out there, they start with validating their business idea first before they put money, time, effort, energy, reputation into pushing a business idea forward without having it properly validated by the market. But then once you validate what we call the value proposition, so your core idea in terms of what your business is offering, that's amazing. But you can't move on to execution from that point on. Some of you might have heard the saying, it doesn't matter if you have the best service or the best product in the world. If nobody knows about it, if no one can access it, then the company is going to fail because you can't make money off it. So once you come up with the value proposition, you validated that, then it's time to build the entire business model around the value proposition. And the value proposition comes from your customer segment that you choose as well. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about, once you have your business, the business model is crystallized, you figured out who your key partners are, what your key activities are, what resources you need, who your customer segment is, what your revenue streams are going to be, what your cost structure is. You have your business model. Now it's time to put it into action, but you have to continuously analyze your business and say to yourself, I have a corporation, and what's the purpose of a corporation? Not just to make money. increase shareholder value into perpetuity. Sometimes that's making money. But if you look at a company that's maybe spending a lot of cash to add features to their new technology, or they're incurring a lot of expenses exploring new markets like Brazil or China or India, they might be making less money overall. But at the same time, they're increasing shareholder value because they're adding all of these new elements to their company that wasn't there before. Okay, so what I get all of my entrepreneurs and my incubator to do, day one, first seminar, I do the orientation. So you heard by Eugene when he was describing my background that we have an incubator that is registered with the Canadian federal government as a designated organization for the startup visa program. So that's a bit of a mouthful. But what that essentially means is that PICAP can be what has been called gatekeepers in terms of letting entrepreneurs immigrate into Canada. And so we analyze the businesses, and we have companies from all over the world: Nigeria, Botswana, Brazil, India, Dubai, China, everywhere. We have 100 companies in our incubator. And so when they come into our program, it's very important for the Canadian government, particularly IRCC or Immigration Canada, to track these companies. Because what do they want? They want that data to say this is having a positive impact on the Canadian economy. And that's something I try to emphasize with these applicants, because they get so anxious and nervous. There's going to be this visa officer that's going to audit me and grill me and ask these questions. And, what do I do? And I try to tell them, well, look, this is not a charity. This is actually an opportunity for the Canadian economy and the Canadian government, because the Canadian government needs more entrepreneurs. They want innovation in this country for the jobs, for the GDP, for the tax revenue. Has anyone heard of a company called Shopify? So if you've heard of Shopify, you probably know that maybe 8 or 9 months ago, it was literally the most valuable company in Canada. Its market cap was $288 billion. So this little tech startup from Ottawa that is about 8 years old blew past the biggest legacy industry players in the country, became more valuable than RBC, became more valuable than all these pharmaceutical companies and resource companies, the pillars of the Canadian economy. This little tech startup beat all of them. One thing that, again, I like to tell these entrepreneurs that are applying for the startup visa program is the biggest tech company in this country was actually started by an immigrant entrepreneur. His name was Toby Lucky. He's from Germany. Anyways, that's a whole other story. But if you need to, and you should, increase your shareholder value, because that's the purpose of every corporation, it's important to be able to benchmark where your company is so that am I actually growing the business? I can't tell you how many times I've seen companies, they've hired our consulting division at PICAP. We come in, massive office, employees zigzagging all over the place, having meetings in boardrooms, having events and parties. And you would think, if you had the untrained eye, that the company is a vibrant tech startup on a trajectory to be a unicorn. But all you have to do is start peeling back the layers a little bit, and then you realize that this company is on a death spiral. Like their burn rate, I think, was like $70,000 a month. They had no idea. Yeah, seriously. I don't want to, it's recorded and confidentiality and all of that. But anyways, so yeah, they were on a death spiral, and eventually the employees were not getting paid for months. And the CEO kept promising them, you're going to get paid, you're going to get rewarded, just hang in there. End of the story, he got taken to the Bureau of Labor, and he had a court order to personally compensate the people he had employed. But then there's other stories of entrepreneurs that had barely anything and made these massive success stories like Toby Lucky with Shopify. Okay, so when we talk about benchmarking, think of it like this. Why do you have an Apple Watch? Why is it so popular to track your fitness? It's because you want to measure your success. Am I burning more calories? And so something that entrepreneurs need to do is track the success of their company. How do they know if they're increasing shareholder value if they don't know what the company was valued at originally? And that's why when companies come into my incubator from overseas, I tell them, look, here are the tools on how to perform a valuation of your business. Because you know what you're going to do when IRCC comes knocking on your door and says, hey, immigrant entrepreneur, are you a real entrepreneur or are you just creating a fake company to get immigration here? They could say, look, when I started this process, my company was valued at X. Now that we're 8 months later, my company has doubled in value. You want me to prove it? Here's my valuations. Just an endless amount of documents that analyze the business and show like what the value is. So one of the simple valuation methods that we look at is called the Berkus method. And you might look, if you're a data scientist, you're going to be like, okay, this is not even kindergarten level math here. But anyways, you use what you can when you're a startup because you don't have the data. It's a startup, so by definition, it is just starting out. It doesn't have that track record. So with the Berkus method, you look at things like the innovative idea that you have for your technology. Is it scalable? Are you able to grow your business without putting more resources into it? Have you kind of broken that correlation between hours and resources going into the company and resources coming out of the company? Hence why software, AI, all these things that are automated are so attractive to venture capitalists. Because unlike charge requests, and I don't put charge requests in the world of venture capital, I'd say that's more of a private equity deal. You don't have all of this capital expenditure like we do, but it's a different strategy. Okay, so then you look at the stage of development of your technology, your prototype, and you measure it against how close are you to being commercially viable? Is it like this thing with wires sticking out of it and looks really gross and weird, but it still somehow works? Maybe you're halfway to commercial viability. So how do you use that to identify the valuation of that particular factor? This is kind of like an algorithm. So if you're halfway to bringing your product to market, you give yourself $250,000 towards your company's valuation. Likewise, with the innovative idea, quality of the management team, you want to see things like if you're an investor or you're analyzing a business to see what the value should be, look at the management. That's one of the most important things. And one of the things that the veteran venture capitalists were advising me when I first started my career in venture capital. They were saying, okay, well, what has this team done before? We don't have any data for this startup, but what data can we use to extrapolate and try to get a sense of what this company might be worth, of the potential? What have the entrepreneurs done in the past? Has the management team proven that they could execute? And if it's a first-time entrepreneur, that's okay. But do they have someone on their team at least, maybe an advisor, a partner, a distribution channel partner that has that experience that could kind of bring that to the table? Because it's very difficult to start and grow a business. And sometimes you need that kind of guidance. You need that team member with a vested interest to help kind of steer the ship. Are there any strategic relationships? How much traction do you have in terms of sales? Most startups don't have any sales when they're trying to do their first round of financing. So they say to me, okay, well, this is a chicken and an egg problem. I need money in order to make money. So how am I going to get traction if I don't have a product to show people? So there's lots of different ways to generate traction. It doesn't always just have to come in the form of sales. So as a venture capitalist, if I'm going to invest in a company, basically, I always want the entrepreneur to prove to me that somebody actually wants this product or service. And if they don't, the sales is always the best, because that's what you're trying to prove at the end of the day. Like the best way to prove that someone's going to pay for something is you've already been selling it to people and they've already been paying for it. But what if you don't have revenue yet? Well, then you can look at other things. I would say on the pecking order, the next valuable thing as a VC that we want to see is purchase orders, a legally binding document to prove that someone will pay for it in the future. And when I say, sometimes I flip-flop between the perspective of an investor and the perspective of the entrepreneur. And sometimes entrepreneurs think, okay, so how do I develop my business model in such a way that it's going to be attractive to investors? The thing is it's synonymous with making a company successful, or building it in such a way that it has a trajectory for success. Like there's no like secret mystical thing that VCs or investors look for that is different than an entrepreneur building their business in the right way to what makes sense for their business model and their market. Sometimes I'll be giving a speech or on a panel and there'll be entrepreneurs in the room and they'll ask me, Stuart, I have this development that I need to do for a product and I could get it done very cheaply in Vietnam. But I hear VCs don't like it when entrepreneurs outsource their product development to another entity, especially another country. And so they say to me, is that true? Should I make sure that we just develop our product in-house instead, so a VC will be more likely to invest? My response to this entrepreneur is always, you know what? Don't ask a VC what you should do in terms of developing your business model. Don't ask your partner, don't ask your mom, don't ask whomever. You should be asking your market. It should be the market that molds your business model for you. So you always have to be looking for that feedback. And as you kind of develop your business model based on the feedback of your customer segment that you're targeting, then you see what form the business model has taken. And if you need financing, like you hit a brick wall, you have to look at your business model and ask yourself, what type of external sources of capital are available to this type of business model that my company has evolved into? That's the kind of line of thinking that an entrepreneur should go through. Not, I want to create a business model that's attractive to VCs. I hear VCs like this list of things, therefore I'm going to design my company around that. That's the wrong approach. Okay, so as you can see, or I hope it's obvious, if not, that's totally fine because I'll point it out right now. When you do a valuation on your company and you answer the question, what is my company worth? You might have seen the show Dragon's Den, where someone will pitch the dragons and say, I'm going to give you 10% for $1 million. And then the Kevin O'Leary or whomever will respond saying, why do you think your company's worth $10 million? Because that's essentially what you're doing. You're putting a price tag on your equity. And so using the Berkus method or all of these other methodologies to kind of figure out what the value of your company is, something that insight that you can gather through doing these different methodologies is extremely important because it shows you where your value gaps are. So if you're doing a valuation, doing the Berkus method, and you're like, oh no, okay, my idea is not very scalable. And my prototype is like just an idea. It's not even close to being ready to be sold. Then it's obvious how to add value to your company. Put more development into your product. Make your idea more scalable. Bring on new team members. If you don't want to give up equity, bring them on initially as advisors first, because at least we want to see that you have those factors embedded into your company. Try to develop some strategic relationships. For us, for PiCap, for ChargerQuest, honestly, if I could give you kind of a secret to our success, strategic relationships. You might ask yourself, okay, PiCap, I've never even heard of PiCap before. How is it that you guys have 100 companies in your incubator from all these different countries? Because if I haven't heard of you and I'm Canadian and I'm in the Yukon, then sure as heck, people in Dubai and Botswana haven't heard of you either. So how are we able to sell our story? We don't even do any marketing. Everything we get for our business is through strategic relationships. So it just so happens we have a strategic partnership relationship with the biggest, oldest immigration law firm in the country called Green and Spiegel. And we travel all over the world with them. And I give speeches to hundreds of people in all these different countries. And there's no way I would have access to that caliber of people in the room, ultra high net worth individuals in all these different countries, if it were not for our strategic relationship with Green and Spiegel. We have relationships with other immigration consultants and law firms, et cetera, as well, that bring us deal flow. Look at our whole business model for ChargerQuest. It all centers around what we call host business partners. $4 million is this mask anyways, $4 million is a fair chunk of change for a startup. Don't get me wrong. I'm very, very thankful that we are able to raise that. And I'm hoping we're going to raise a lot more soon, but it is not enough for us to go out and buy real estate in all these different provinces that we have our charging stations. So if we don't have strategic relationships with these property owners to position our charging stations so we can get access to all of the traffic going by their facilities, then we have no business model. We would have to raise hundreds of millions of dollars to position our charging stations there. But now we don't need to, because of the power of coming up with these kind of win-win scenarios. Best way to scale. Okay, so when you have performed evaluation on your company, whether it's the Burkus method or the risk factor summation method or the VC method, all these different methodologies, you could use that insight to answer the question, why is my company only worth $2 million now and not $20 million? So the answers that you come up with for that question allows you to have a blueprint or a roadmap to build, to say, okay, well, now I know exactly how to grow my company and increase shareholder value, because I just input all of those things that were hampering the value of my company when I did my valuation a month ago. And so you just map out into the future what we call a value growth curve. So you come up with these series of, in this diagram, they call it stepping stones or plateaus of value, or you're leveling up the value of your business over time. And then you could put within each of those stepping stones the resources required to surpass one stage after another. And so here you can see it says Series A investment, Series B investment, Series C. So those are the different stages of capital, a round of financing that companies go through when they're getting VC financing. But I mean, you don't have to look at that. Like, just look at resources. In this example, they need more people on their software development team. You can see stepping stone 2, they need 2 development partners. Maybe they need some distribution channel partners like I discussed. Maybe they need more traction. They need sales. They need LOIs or purchase orders, whatever you call it. Oh, thanks for asking the question. Letter of intent. So if a company says to me, Stuart, we want you to invest $500,000 into our company. It's amazing. Once we develop it, people are going to love it. I'm going to say to them, okay, well, prove to me that people will love it and are willing to pay for it. And well, I don't have any sales yet because we're a startup. All right, fine. Well, do you have a purchase order? No, we don't have a purchase order. So then if they don't have a purchase order, I would say the next level down on the pecking order is an LOI or letter of intent. So often entrepreneurs will come up to me and they'll say, we're in talks with Google, or we're in talks with Canadian Tire. It seems like every entrepreneur is in talks with someone. That's amazing. And so that's all fine and dandy, but my response is always, I'm happy for you. That's great. Prove it. Get a document signed by an actual purchaser saying that they will be interested, and I'm using very non-legally binding language here. They may be interested in possibly entertaining the thought of buying from you, maybe if you have all of these specs that meet their qualifications. So even if it's as loosey-goosey as that, at least that's some sort of indication that somebody is willing to sign their name and have their position there and say, I am, I will explore this further. Because again, that's an indication to us that if you say, I'm in talks with Walmart, what the heck does that mean? Do you walk into Walmart and have a conversation with the greeter at a retail store? Or are you talking with like a senior buyer or something like that? Okay, so yeah, map out the resources you need at each plateau. Question.
I'm curious, no matter is there something that might be of interest when it comes to consumers being your target market?
Yeah, absolutely. I find myself giving the same kind of advice to entrepreneurs over and over again, which is I think resonates with them. And so what I find myself saying often is for entrepreneurs to kind of put themselves in the right mindset is look at pitching to a panel of investors, kind of like you're a litigation lawyer in front of a judge and a jury. And so if you have a case, and in this situation, the entrepreneur's cases or their thesis is, my company is a good company to invest in. I'm going to get you a 10x return. People are going to buy from us. Then if you're a litigation lawyer arguing a case, what do you have to do to back up your case? You need proof and evidence. And so your question, is it okay to get a letter of intent from consumers, is better than not having a letter of intent from consumers. But of course, you want to show scalability. So if it's a B2B business and they sell to DARPA and the Canadian military and, Pfizer, that's a weird combination right there. But if they sell to massive entities that will buy a huge amount over a very long period of time, and you get LOIs from them, that's amazing. But if you're a B2C company, you have to show and prove scalability. So you have to get a huge data set. Again, as the data scientist, get the data to prove your case to the investor and to prove to yourself that this business idea is worth pursuing. Okay, so external capital and the purpose of external capital. So sometimes, and progressively, the trend in venture capital and investing, angel investing, etc., you'll appreciate this when you know what's going on in the economy and the stock market. And when you're in a volatile, risky environment, and you don't know what's going to happen next. What does the world look like after the pandemic? Is there going to be a new wave? What's happening with the war in the Ukraine, with Russia? Is China going to invade Taiwan? All of these questions play into the psyche of investors because they think, okay, do I want to add more risk to my portfolio or less risk? So I have all this money in the stock market and it's going up and down every day. Do I want to bring on more risk by investing in a startup, which is the riskiest asset class? you know, 90% failure rate. It's the riskiest asset class you could put money into. Or do I want to get less risk? So whenever you see in the stock market, in the economy, times of uncertainty, that's synonymous with risk and volatility. And so when you have a risky situation in the stock market and in the economy, investors don't want to add risk to their portfolio. So they prefer to see companies with a more proven business model. And so progressively, VCs, angel investors, private equity fund managers, the trend has been progressively investing in companies that are later stage, proven business models. In fact, when I talk to entrepreneurs and I mentor them, they're sometimes surprised to hear me say, as a venture capitalist, don't get money from a VC. Or I say to them, the last thing you should do is try to pitch a VC for financing. And it's not because I'm giving them insight like VCs are bad. You know, you don't want them to get involved in your business. They're just going to fire you and take your company over. It's because that's what venture capitalists want to see. They want to see how far can you get on your own. Venture capitalists, and now angel investors as well, do not want to put money into an entrepreneur so they could figure out what their business model should be. It's more like this. They want to put money into a proven business model where the entrepreneur has been bootstrapping and all signs, you know, all stars are in alignment and all the signs are there that this company is going to be successful. You have the purchase orders or the letter of intent. You have the sales that you're bringing in. And then all of a sudden you hit a brick wall and you're thinking, I could supersize this company. I might be making $200,000 in sales, but if I am able to get an additional $2 million from an investment, I could scale up and enter these different markets, and I could add these different features that my customers are telling me I need. You know, all these other things that you can prove to the investor, then they'll look at it and you're kind of doing the work for them. You're like, look, I know exactly what I'm going to do with your money. I know where I'm going to put it. I know how it's going to scale my business. And all you need to do is just inject that capital, maybe provide a little bit of advice or guidance or introductions to your network. And I'm going to supersize your investment. I'll get you that 10x return and exit your company, exit your position within 3 to 5 years, which is kind of the standard time frame that investors want to liquidate their position. Okay, so external sources of capital, often you need it to, you know, pay for things like premises, new equipment, advertising, day-to-day kind of running your business, wages, expanding, or debt restructuring. Right, so now I'm going to get into the unique cash flow and risk dynamics of early stage ventures. So why am I spending time talking about this? Is it? Yes. That's okay.
When you said that investment, you want to approach a VC when you want investment, when you need some sort of growth, like you want to add some features, if a company is approaching you for investment to do something very basic, such as paying salaries, that company won't.
No, it doesn't. And that's a really good question, by the way. And thanks for asking it, because my questions during your presentation would have been ridiculously basic, and thus I shied away from it. But you had an amazing presentation, by the way. Yeah, no problem. So no, there is no automatic indication that they're on death spiral mode, except for them burning cash at such an alarming rate that you could say, okay, they've got 3 months of runway left, meaning they have 3 months at the rate at which they're burning their cash before they go out of business. And then you look at what they're doing, you're saying, asking yourself, is it likely this company is going to start generating cash inflow before they completely run out of money? That's how to look at it. So when we talk about it, and it's a good segue actually, to the J curve, the famous J curve that all startup tech companies follow. So the J curve is the cumulative cash flow curve of a startup. So what happens is in its early stages of development, it's burning cash. It's not making money because it's in discovery mode. It's trying to figure out what is our business model. It's trying to develop maybe what we call a minimum viable product, a version of your product with just enough features to bring it to the market and test it and see, do people like using this? Are people demanding more or not? And I mean, at least that's what you should be doing. So your burn rate is the amount of cash that you burn on average within a month. And so your runway, and when you get into venture capital, startup tech world, constantly these terms will be coming up. What is your burn rate? What is our runway? And if it's not, that's a bit of a red flag. Companies should always be looking at the burn rate versus the runway. So burn rate, as mentioned, is the average amount of cash that you spend per month. And your runway is the number of months you have before you run out of cash. So it's a very easy calculation. You take the total amount of cash you have on reserve, and then you divide it by your burn rate. So you take your total cash divided by the amount of cash you're spending per month, and that gives you the number of months before you run out of cash. And that is the biggest indicator if a company is in death spiral mode or not. Because if the laser doesn't really show up here, I'll just walk over here. Because if your runway is going to end here, but you're bringing your market, look, timeline, cumulative cash goes down before it starts coming back up. This is your break-even line, so 0. If you're spending money and you're targeted to start generating cash inflow at this stage of your timeline, but then you just calculated your runway and it ends right there, then you are in death spiral mode, because you will run out of money before you start bringing money in. So you always want to make sure that your runway ends here. You have enough cash on reserve to survive while you figure out what your business model should be, and then you start generating cash flow. And once you hit here, break even, that is the most exciting time of a company's life, because that is the time at which you could say, my business model is a success. You're not killing it. You're not generating a massive return for yourself, but your company is able to stand on its own 2 feet. And when I say cash flow, for the accountants in the room, I'm talking about free cash flow from operations. I'm not talking about investors putting money in, or loans from the bank, or money on your credit card. I'm talking the money that you are spending meets the money that you are making through the core operations of your business. That's when you reach break even. And that's also that important inflection point that I showed you on that other graph, at which the hockey stick curve, or sorry, the blade of the hockey stick meets the handle of the hockey stick, and your business model has been crystallized, solidifies, written in cement. And what are you going to do once you have a good business model and a business structure? Then it's time to supersize that thing, see how big the monster can get while doing good in the world, and all of that. And I really mean that, actually. But anyways, okay, here's kind of a zoomed in look at a part of the J curve. And this part that's zoomed in, we refer to that in venture capital startup world as the valley of death, or death valley. So when we say 90% of companies fail, 90% of startups fail, that's where they fail, because they don't figure out the cash flow risk dynamics of their business until it's too late. They don't look at things like burn rate versus runway. That company that I was talking about, that I walked into the office and I didn't want to divulge the name of the company. It had raised $500,000 and they were just blowing cash like no tomorrow. It was ridiculous. I actually know an even worse story. I know a kid who was in his early 20s who raised $7 million from a family, a billionaire, indigenous billionaire, by the way, but I'm not going to give any more details because, again, confidentiality. So it's very unfortunate. And I don't blame the kid because he didn't have the right guidance, unfortunately, but he blew $7 million within a few years. And then, of course, that billionaire investor is never going to invest in another tech startup again because he couldn't nail down burn rate versus runway. He just thought, we have money from investors. Now we can afford to hire all of my favorite dudes from high school. And literally that's what, he put him on his board of directors, all of his friends. And I don't know, he got removed. Yeah. Yeah, partying, blasting all over Instagram about how amazing the company's doing and all this other stuff. And then, of course, they weren't actually legitimately trying to grow their business. They were just blowing cash, thinking, the good times are going to last forever, not looking at the spiral of money going down the drain. And then, of course, they ran out of money before the company started making money. And then the company failed. Okay, so usually when I give lectures, I try to do a little pulse check on the class. This isn't a class, obviously, but I want to get a sense of, are people following along? Because if not, then I'll take a break. But it seems like everyone's kind of following along. So if you feel like you need a break, put your hand up. And by the way, I do like the questions while I'm instructing. If you want to just sit back and enjoy the ride, that's okay. Or if you want to ask questions, that's perfectly fine as well. Okay, so there's a number of different perspectives, or just fundamentally two different perspectives when it comes to a company's growth trajectory. For some reason, there is this trend in social media. I mean, pardon the term, but people call it motivation porn. So it's like you have these influencers who talk about hustle culture and thinking positive and law of attraction and looking to the universe and only ever thinking positive thoughts and never dare you think something negative, because then the universe will bring you negative stuff. Okay, I don't believe in that, and I'll prove why. Anyone hear of Chris Hadfield, the famous Canadian astronaut? Have you read his book? I can't remember the exact title, but his book essentially talks about the value of thinking negatively. So he's totally going against the grain of this motivational influencers that you see out there. And so what he says is that, and he relates it to business, he says, if you're an astronaut, if you're going into space, you have to think negatively because you have to go through the mental exercise of thinking about every possible permutation of what can go wrong with your spacecraft, because when you're in outer space, it's a life or death situation. You have to be prepared for anything that could possibly go wrong. And so he relates that to business because it is essentially the same thing. So if you have a company like the kid who raised $7 million, or this other guy with a cryptocurrency company that has $500,000, and they were just spending money like there's no tomorrow, they're not considering what could possibly go wrong. And I'm not going to make this a lecture on finance and financial models and accounting and that sort of thing. Like, I'm not going to put you through that, so don't worry. But what I will show you is the direct impact that your mode of thinking as an entrepreneur versus how investors view the potential success of your business and how it could have a detrimental impact on your business. So in the financial model from the entrepreneur's perspective, you can see that they are wearing rose-colored glasses. You need to be a visionary. You need to be optimistic to be an entrepreneur. You need to be crazy like Steve Jobs thinks of it. And that's a good thing. You need to be obsessed with your company enough and believe it's going to be amazingly successful. But here's the challenge. You might think, okay, I'm going to start bringing in money very quickly. We're going to launch our product. We're going to start getting $300,000. Of course, think of this as forward looking. So this is into the future. And then we're going to continually grow our revenue into the future because that's what companies do. They grow revenue. We know what our costs are. That's a fixed variable. It's easy to find out what the cost of something's going to be. Then we translate that to our net profit or net loss, and then that calculates further to our cumulative cash flow needs. So see how the impact of their projected revenue is on their cumulative cash flow needs. Companies go out of business because they run out of money. Companies that think they're going to generate revenue when they don't go out of business because all of a sudden they've been spending all of this money and then all their cumulative cash flow needs is like so far out of whack. And then so the investor's perspective is more pragmatic, more pessimistic, if you will, more realistic possibly. Zeros across the board until question marks in the future. So then they're thinking, this is what your real cumulative cash flow needs are. You better prepare for this scenario and not act like this is going to happen. If this happens, great, but don't be spending money like there's no tomorrow expecting you to make money because you're doing something that oftentimes the world has never seen before, creating this new invention. That's what it is to be a startup tech company usually. The type of company that a VC will invest in. Innovation, creating something disruptive. But the problem with doing something new is that you have no data on if it's going to be successful or not. So you have to look for those other indicators. Okay, why don't we, yeah, no problem. Why don't we take a 20-minute break? So it's 2:55. We'll meet back here at 3:15. Oh, thanks. All right.
I am gonna go stupid here, and I am going to go.
They are unusually surely
They are what?
they are learning about soul and
The only is how I asked about that. I will talk about the product, but it doesn't matter to you.
Yeah. That's fine. You know, at this event, yeah, whatever. It is what it is.
It's cool, though. I didn't realize that you're traveling a lot just to kind of teach some of these things to different areas. That'd be really cool to hear.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been crazy. Like we since like that's part of how my company PodCap became successful. So we started the company and I was struggling like crazy because I was trying to raise money for a VC fund and I had no traction or background. And I'm like, no one's going to invest in a guy running his own VC fund. So I kept coming up with this issue with investors. They're like, okay, well, I don't know you. We've never done anything before. Why would I put money into your fund? So
that makes sense. Yeah.
So what I did was I had to prove to the world that I knew what I was doing. And so I started, speaking at these different events and stuff. And that led, like I was literally paid, like all expenses paid. I guess I'm kind of doing it on this trip, but like China, Mongolia, Mexico, all over Europe and stuff like that, just talking to entrepreneurs and more prospective investors that people want to get into angel investing in VC.
Yeah, I will say, I admittedly, like I have been kind of wondering, curious about how your model works because I'm not that much in the world, right? But I will say a couple of weeks leading up to this startup group, they've been doing a lot in terms of trying to wrap up the community and kind of the available infrastructure there. I remember like 12 years ago when I first did my first startup, no incubators in town, right?
So are you talking about Edmonton?
Edmonton.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. No incubators in town. BDC, BDC had like a loan, right, that you could potentially request and ask for. That was mainly it. You know, a software company or a software startup at that point was. That, to be fair, to your point about being optimistic, and I think me and my co-founder had that problem of we were successful with pretty much everything we did, right? Failure was never an issue, right? Read the right books. Okay, we're gonna do this good thing and still make money for nonprofits, right? Then realize when you're in that this is not a great idea. But it was good learning experience for us. And in fact, like, just out of curiosity, this company you spoke of that raised that money, wouldn't be any chance happen to be like on the software side of things somewhere?
Which one?
The one that you're talking about.
$500,000 crypto
yeah.
company, or the one that raised $7 million?
No, $500,000.
It's software based crypto.
Oh,
OTC.
Okay, never mind. The reason why I asked that is because I was on the flip side of that situation.
Okay.
As the employee going through the labor board.
Yeah, really, eh?
Yeah.
You know what? Okay, so when you like, maybe I should have mentioned this at the beginning of the lecture, like if you're thinking of working with a startup, partnering, like you should be putting them through the same analysis as this. Because you don't want to partner up with someone who's destined for failure. It's a waste of time.
But I will say there's a slight difference here in that. I mean, the signs were there, but you're young enough to not know different. But there was clearly issues of fraud at some point, right?
Oh, God.
And the CEO was so good at selling to people, getting investors to come on board, just under the investment radar of like, okay, you can't have that many investors, you have to be registered. I think he knew all the ins and outs.
Yeah.
But employees weren't being paid, but then there's a brand new office in the middle of downtown Toronto, right? Great for the purposes of trying to show that you're doing well and get investment, but or at least on the facade, he wasn't going. The founder wasn't going after investors who knew what they're talking about, right? We're talking about literally smaller towns where he had some connections before and tried to get investment that way. Anyways, that's the long and short of it. That was just my experience of that is the things. And it was after our first startup that they thought, hey, you know what, you guys look great. You're great with technology. Why don't you guys come on in and build this out? We were promised equity. 20% of zero is still zero, right?
Yeah.
So another lesson to be learned, but it was, sorry, I'm just trying to refer back to your point about like all the best intentions doesn't really matter, right? The market doesn't give a shit, honestly, right?
Yeah.
So it was fun. Yeah, we learn new things for sure. But yeah, I was curious about how your business, how your fund comes about, what types of it, like, nothing to answer within the next couple of minutes, but yeah, just genuinely curious, because leading up to this, the point was, the infrastructure or the available resources in Edmonton has dramatically increased. Apparently, even a couple of years ago, they had difficulties getting VCs and come to Edmonton just to chat, whereas this time, the one that I attended a few weeks ago was a panel of VCs where they had, I don't know, a whole bunch of them that were in town, a bunch of them on incubators, and a bunch of them from Calgary, and one other one from like more regional
Innovation center, yeah.
So it's not really like, they call it growth or growing cities or whatever was how they defined it. But yeah, it was really fascinating to hear them talking as a panel, actually, because usually you get VCs with their individual perspectives about things, but to see them all agree or disagree about certain subjects was kind of a neat experience to hear. The one thing they kept talking about was the money management aspect, which isn't generally something to talk about to people who are trying to get their money. It's not really the super interesting part, but hearing about that, right, and how that whole system works was interesting to me. And so that's why I was curious about how yours came about, because for them, yeah, trying to get, they also have to convince, like you're saying, people to give them money, and in their case, they often already had some amount of traction, right?
Mhm.
So I was curious how you went about doing that, because I don't know about your background, but it does sound really neat, and I wasn't sure, but now I have a little bit more of an understanding, right?
Yeah, I'll get it. Yeah, I'll get into that with this. So yeah, maybe should we start or like, is it okay? Yeah, other people online.
Yes.
Okay. Intimate setting here. No, it's fine. Okay, so yeah.
Can I ask the question? Sorry, are we starting?
Yeah, you want to grab this mic?
Okay, you want to ask the question from the Zoom people? Okay.
Thank you.
Hello. Okay. Hi, everyone. We're going to get started again here. And we'll get started first with a question from Katrina. She's curious about how VCs think about companies like Uber, which on the one hand are unicorns, but also had business models that underprice the offering to grab market share and are now having trouble being viable. Is it more about getting out there quickly? Why do these kind of ventures still get funding? Why do these type of ventures still get funded? So Adam Newman is getting funded again after blowing up WeWork. Multi-part question. Maybe if you want to, I can repeat parts of it to you if you want as well.
No, that's okay. Thanks, Eugene. And who was on the?
Katrina.
Katrina, thank you, Katrina. Excellent questions. Okay, so just to paraphrase, you're wondering, how is it that these companies like Airbnb, possibly WeWork and other ones get financed by a VC, even though they don't have a clear path to being profitable, cash flow positive, etc. So excellent question. So progressively, the trend is moving towards companies that have a clear path to profitability. But having said that, it helps to understand the logic and the mindset of a venture capitalist. So the job of a VC, surprise, surprise, is to generate the highest return possible for their what we call limited partners or investors who put money into our fund. It's not necessarily to invest in companies that are going to be profitable per se, although that's often a byproduct. So what does a VC want to do? Just like all investors, we want to buy low and we want to sell high. So if we see that a company has the ability to increase shareholder value, even if it's not generating a profit, and we see that we can exit that investment opportunity, then it's a good investment for us. because we would have done our job, buying low and then selling high. So if we invest in a company that has millions of followers and the hype is through the roof and the value of the company keeps growing and growing and growing based on all these different metrics, and we can say, okay, this company is going to IPO in a couple of years, then we're doing our job. We're generating a return. Katrina, does that help answer the question? And you're talking about Adam Neumann as well. That is extremely interesting, very controversial. So those who may not be overly familiar with Adam Neumann and WeWork, Adam Neumann is the founder of WeWork. And the controversy around that company, it was valued at, I think, $40 billion, something crazy like that. But the company was, for some reason, positioned as a tech company, a unicorn. And even though they kept talking about it being a tech company and it's okay that they're not profitable, ignore the fact that we're 100% in the real estate world, they were able to just generate so much hype. And it was like this hype vacuum just feeding in on itself to get the valuation super high. And then the big downfall of WeWork is they took the company public. And in taking a company public, you have to be very transparent with everything that's going on in your business. And once they did that, they found out they were not, in fact, a tech company. Their metrics did not back up the value of the business. They were not profitable. They had massive risk. They were buying all of this real estate, getting all this loans, but their cash flow was not secure. People can enter and leave WeWork whenever they wanted. There's a huge laundry list of issues that all came to light when they tried to go public, because that's when they had to become transparent, and that's when everything crashed.
Katrina mentioned it does. You answered the question, though she's not sure. She's not sure that
You're filtering it, making it sound nicer than.
No, I think I'm misinterpreting the way I said it. Probably would have come not the way she intended.
Okay.
She's not sure it's a good thing societally, but she gets it.
Yeah. Sometimes, it's good to look for returns when returns means making tons of money and doing good in the world. Other times, those two paths diverge. But progressively, and I've seen this on Bay Street and in the venture capital world and finance holistically, the ever-growing trend of wanting to do impact investing, wanting to make sure that you're investing in companies that are good for the environment or good for society, et cetera, et cetera. So that's should hopefully give a little bit of hope on the horizon there.
Sorry, Stuart, just one more extra comment here.
Go ahead.
I think I might have missed it, but I think Katrina's saying that feels like some people get rewarded for what feels like a scam.
There are people out there that scam people. I mean, anytime you're in a situation where there is a ton of money to be had and it's private companies that don't have the disclosure requirements that publicly traded companies do, bad things happen. But it would be wrong to look at a couple of bad things and say that's representative of the entire industry, because there's so much good that happens in the world of venture capital as well. You know what? Sometimes VCs have a bad connotation to it for some reason. Like I'll go to a party and I'll meet someone and they'll say, what do you do? And I'll tell them I'm in venture capital. And they'll say, oh, you're like one of those corporate raiders. All you want to do is just buy a business and then fire the CEO. But they just have a bad reputation for whatever reason. That's not the case. In fact, as a VC, we do what we call betting on the jockey, not the horse. So we're investing in an entrepreneur per se, and their ability to execute on their business model. We're not investing in the company itself, because we know that as a VC, investing in a company in a very early stage, often there's so much changing and adapting that has to happen. And so that's why, as I emphasized when we were looking at that valuation method, the Burkus method, I mentioned the management team is one of the most important things that you look for in terms of putting money into a company. Can they execute? Ideas are a dime a dozen. If you take an Uber ride and tell someone, oh, I went to this seminar put on by this VC and I learned all this stuff about growing a business and raising money, the Uber driver might likely say, oh, I have an idea for a company. Do you think it'll be successful? In fact, go to a party or an event, maybe not one with, filled with government people, but I guess go to some of my events and say, I'm a venture capitalist, and all of a sudden you'll get swarmed by people pitching you, wanting money. But the thing is you got to like look through which one of them has the ability to execute versus fit into that 90 percentile. Okay, so when you're establishing your business model, when you're creating it, there's certain things that you might want to consider. For example, gross margins. When I'm going to invest in a company or create a business, you want to get your gross margins as high as possible. These are little things to look for because it'll give you the best chances of success. It'll decrease your risk of failure and you'll make a lot more money. So if I'm making 7 figures in revenue at PiCap, I am so happy because I know that that basically means I'm making 7 figures in earnings because our gross margins are in the 90s. Like it's probably 95%. And I don't know if this is like the CFO mind in me, but I relentlessly bring down burn rate. I am constantly like, I warn entrepreneurs. I say to them like, look, you want me to be a part of your company? You want me to be an advisor or a partner? I'm telling you this is what I'm going to do day one. I'm going to look at your burn rate and I'm going to say, all right, how are we going to get this thing as close to 0 as possible? So fun fact, when I went for coffee in the room, I saw one of the coffee cups turned over and I took a photo of it. And people were like, why the heck is he doing that? Because on the bottom of that coffee cup, I know you're wondering what the hell is he talking about? On the bottom of that coffee cup, it said Brown. That's my last name, Brown. So that, it is the same spelling. And the reason is because that comes from my family's business that has actually been acquired. Maybe there's some psychological thing there. No, it's my own clothing line. No, it's not at all. Okay, so yeah, so fun fact, I saw the coffee cup there. That's what my family's business did. They sold it. But my father and my uncle who are running the company loved talking about how the company was making $50 million in revenue, which is impressive, don't get me wrong. But what they're not telling you is how much profit were they making. So what's better, having a company that's making $50 million with 0 earnings or 0 profit, or a company that's making $5 million in revenue and retaining $5 million in profit? Because that's going to the shareholders right afterwards. So that's all about gross margins. And so by minimizing your burn rate, by minimizing your fixed costs, by minimizing your working capital needs, your chances of success are better because you're bringing down your burn rate. You're bringing down the amount of money you're spending per month. And when you do that, you're extending your runway. You're giving yourself more time to come up with a winning business strategy. And nowadays that we really don't need physical offices, or people argue we do, there's the debate going on. But yeah, one little turnoff for me when I see a startup is if they have an office. I was always thinking this, like, why do you have an office? Do you really need an office? Maybe it's because when I started PiCap for the first few years, I was literally the lobby of the Sheraton in Toronto was my office. Like me and my business partner would be hammering away there. They have amazing desks and Wi-Fi access and stuff. Anyways, we have an office now, but I barely even use it. But we do have meetings and stuff like that. So I need it, but a lot of companies don't. Okay. So one thing to watch out for if you're going to get financing by a VC is VCs get pitched to constantly. Like over and over and over again, like hundreds of companies. And so entrepreneurs get frustrated because they think, okay, well, it's such a challenge to maintain the attention of a VC. They're always on to the next shiny object. But then the risk there is it becomes kind of a slippery slide for the entrepreneur because they're trying to retain the attention of the VC, and they're talking about all these amazing things that the companies is going to do. It's going to grow 10 times its current value. It's going to generate tons of money. It's going to close that deal with Intel or Walmart or whomever. But the VC is thinking on the back of his, her, their mind that if this company falls short of all of these amazing things it's talking about, this is an opportunity for me to withhold money that I have committed to them. And by doing that, and this company is desperate to get it, you can go back to the negotiating table and demand more equity and take control of the business and do all of these other things. We call that milestone financing. Because a company will say, like, I need $1 million. And if I'm the VC, I'll say, well, what are you going to spend it on? Oh, well, first we need to develop our product. Then we need to market it. Then we need to hire sales. And then I'll tell them, okay, so you mentioned a number of things that need to happen over a given period of time. You don't need the $1 million right away. I'll commit to invest $1 million, but I'm only going to give you money to get you to your next milestone. So if you say I need to do product development first, I'll say, okay, well, here's money to do product development. Let's see what you're able to do with that. And then if they fall short of the product development, you can go back to them and you said, I'm sorry, you're in breach of our negotiation. You promised me you would get this far. So now if you want more money, I'm going to now demand more equity, or I'm going to demand more control, or I'm going to demand more upside potential. Upside potential means, well, the amount of money you can get from your investment if there's a liquidity event. So if I own 10% of a company and the company in the future gets bought for $100 million, I'm going to get $10 million. So my upside potential is the 10% of the company, 10% of whatever the company's bought out for. But there's legal trickery that us VCs can use to get way more than 10%, even if I only own 10%. It all gets into the nitty gritty of the legal documents. And sometimes entrepreneurs are so desperate to get cash and get the cachet of having a VC on their team, yeah, stamp of approval, that they'll sign anything really. But unbeknownst to them, if the company gets bought out, even though the VC only owns 10% of the company, they might get 80% of whatever money was paid. And then the entrepreneurs are left with barely anything. That's right. Yep.
So in today's volatile world, right? Like if you were starting a company in 2017, you wouldn't know that COVID happened and then all this market fluctuation and supply chain issues and all that thing. So how do you protect yourself as an entrepreneur for those things you can't, like, nobody was going to predict COVID or all the supply chain issues that are happening now. So how do you, I don't know, build in some protection for that if your VCs are coming back and saying you didn't show me the goods, right? Or you didn't meet your goals, yet those things are things that are not within anyone's control, really.
Yeah, you're right. They would take that into consideration, because that's like a black swan kind of scenario that no one can see coming. But I'll also mention this. Talking about science, you know what the species that has the best chance of being successful? It's not the biggest, the ones that are adaptable, right? Yeah, they could, yeah. Okay, so charge request, and my students, I should have a charge request swear jar. Every time I say the term charge request, I should put money into it and then buy us all a pizza at the end of the class kind of thing. So I'm going to try to control my talking of charge requests, but in terms of adaptability, we started the company in October of 2019. So it's a pretty new company. And and our business model is dependent on people traveling to pay to get charged their vehicles. All of a sudden, COVID hits, lockdown. Our investors, very early investors, friends, family, whomever, they all thought, okay, this has got to be the kiss of death for the company. But I have to applaud the entrepreneur for his adaptability. He is like, it's really funny hearing him in meetings with investors because they'll be throwing all of this negative stuff and he always, like, the world could be on fire and that's a benefit to charge request because of blah, 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 blah. So, but he proved it though. He made the lockdown a benefit to charge request because, okay, it all comes down to the business model in terms of our like host business partners. So we are dependent on having host business partners, as mentioned before, having our charging stations on these different properties and them agreeing to give us the property so we can install our charging station. And then we do this 20/80 revenue share with them. So it's actually quite smart. So of course, as I mentioned, lockdown, people don't travel. So how is the company going to make money? Well, we thought, okay, well, what could we do instead to add value to the business? Entrepreneurs should always be thinking, how do we add value? Something bad happens, a black swan, how can we use it to add value to our business? So look at charge request business, signing up host business partners. Before lockdown and before COVID, we would be approaching hotels, shopping malls, parking facilities and telling them, let us install our charging station here, we'll pay for everything and we'll share our revenue, net revenue 80/20. You know what some of them would say to us? Why the heck don't I just buy a charging station myself and keep 100% of the revenue? And we had all these reasons to talk to them about this and that. I'm not going to get into it. Then all of a sudden, COVID hits, lockdown. And these hotels and shopping malls and parking facilities are dying. They have no means of making money. So we still had money left over from our investors. And we even, when I approached this, not even having enough money, but what we went to them and said to them, look, you are in survival mode. Do you want a charging station on your property? Do you want to be able to tell your board of directors that you're taking your company, your shopping mall, your hotel, and you're actually able to accomplish something during the pandemic by making it green friendly, by making it on the maps of all of the major cell phone apps that show where their charging stations are. So if somebody's driving an EV, they're going to go to your location, and while they're charging their vehicle, they're going to be eating at your restaurant or buying products, you know, when the pandemic ends or whatever. Do you want to have something positive to happen in this pandemic? And by the way, you don't have to buy your own charging station because you don't have the money to do it right now. We'll pay for everything. And so we got contract after contract after contract all over the country, hotel chains, shopping malls, huge real estate investment trusts saying, I want to have your charging stations all over all of our properties because this is a win for us while everything else is in lockdown. We have some good news to present and we don't have the money right now to spend on our own charging stations. So then we went to our investors with this massive stack of contracts saying, look at all the hotels that want to work with us. Like we have some of the best names in the country saying, I want, in the best locations in the country saying, I want your charging station on my property. I want to sign up to the charge request model. I want to partner with you guys. This is going to be an amazing opportunity. And investors were looking at that and doing the math. Okay, so there is a light at the end of the tunnel of this pandemic. If this happens, the EV adoption is going to be massive. Some states in the US are going to be 100% EV by 2030, likewise with BC and other areas. The writing's on the wall. The whole industry is turning electric. It's like a now or never opportunity. And then honestly, that's when we raised our biggest round of financing. It was right at the heart of the pandemic. We raised $3.1 million, all through virtual meetings. And we did it in a few weeks. And that gave us the latitude, the runway to just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. That's kind of where we are and how we got there today. Yes.
Sorry, I had a question about the scenario you pointed out on the equity where VCs have the opportunity to see that you're missing milestones and then be able to then go up in terms of the upside potentially or get more equity or whatnot. I also got the impression that from what I heard from other sort of VCs on this panel I attended some time ago, that the first thing they often look at for a company is their cap table, right? How is it structured? And more importantly, what is the percentage that the founders have? Because if the percentage starts to get a little bit too small, then they're not interested because they want to see the founders start, walking away from the venture itself. So how does that necessarily jive? I guess maybe it's just small decimal points, maybe of increase that to the founder might seem painful, but in the overall scheme, it doesn't make a big difference.
So so it's just, if I could boil it down, you're saying, how do I reconcile what you talked about, milestone financing, where the VC seems to be taking over a company versus what I heard on this panel, where VCs they want the entrepreneur to be incentivized and
Yes.
have ownership.
No, that's precisely it. Thank you.
Excellent question. I'm glad you asked it. So this kind of goes back to what I've mentioned before. VCs want to bet on the jockey, not the horse. So it is important for us, venture capitalists, to make sure that the entrepreneur is incentivized, just like you heard on the panel, that's bang on. And to do that, we do want the entrepreneur, or at least the founding team, to own the majority of the equity, because we're essentially betting on them. We don't want them being disgruntled and thinking these VCs took advantage of us. And so that's kind of a rule of thumb. And that's why a lot of the kind of bad reputation about VCs isn't overly accurate, because we really do want the entrepreneurs to succeed with their business and feel motivated and incentivized. So that is honestly like the number one thing. Investing in a private company, whether you're an angel or a venture capitalist, it is a very long-term relationship. And like any relationship, marriage, friendship, whatever, it has to be built on trust, respect. Both parties have to feel like they're being treated fairly, communication, transparency. All of those elements are pivotal to any successful relationship, but not least of which between an investor and an issuer. An issuer just means a company that's looking to issue shares for investment. And so having something like milestone financing, it's a bit of a fail-safe for the investors, because investors know that you, the entrepreneur, know a lot more about your business than I do. And so if you're telling me that you're able to achieve all of these things, there's only so much research and analysis that can be had. And so it's a way for us to kind of protect ourselves in case we're investing in an entrepreneur that's bending the vortex of reality a little bit when they're pitching their company to us and trying to keep us interested. Well, I teach a full class, 3 hours. I call it term sheets and other legal documents. I teach my MBAs and my Master of Finance students aspiring to be investors. And in that class, it just lists off one tactic after another. Milestone financing is one of them. And there's bring along, drag along clause, liquidity preferences. The list goes on and on and on in terms of all these things that we can embed into a deal to protect ourselves and try to get the highest return that we possibly can. So sometimes the class is looking at me like, okay, there you go. That's why people hate VCs, because they try to trick us. If I'm an entrepreneur, you're trying to trick me into signing up to this. But that's the wrong way to look at it. Investing into a startup is extremely risky. Our job, believe it or not, is not to help out entrepreneurs. It's not to improve the economy. It's not to do good in the world. All of those things hopefully are byproducts of what we do. But our real job is to make money for our investors within a certain given parameter. Like that's why investors put money into a fund, is because we're going to generate a return for them. They're the customer, not the entrepreneur. The entrepreneur in the startup is kind of like the product. Sounds kind of bad, but that's just how it's structured. You know, we live in a capitalist world and that's what happens, but you could use it to your advantage. And often entrepreneurs do. Okay. Financial decision-making. What do you do with that little bit of cash that you have? But I want to take it a step further. Don't look at money as your only investment into this asset that you call the startup. Even if it's your own company, again, you are not synonymous with your business idea. Your business idea, if you want to think like a successful entrepreneur, your business idea, your business is an asset that you are putting resources in so that you can get a return from it. Just like a VC putting money into a startup. You're all putting resources into something. So I like to tell entrepreneurs that when you're working on a startup, you're investing not just money, but your time, your effort, your focus, your energy, your reputation. All of that stuff are valuable units that you are putting into this thing called a startup so that you can get a return from it, so that you can make money off of it, so that you could do good in the world, whatever the case may be. So you should be very careful in terms of how you spend those units of value. Time is the most valuable resource you have. It's the only resource you can never get back. Okay, so you'll have to think like, if I'm going to put assets into this business, how do I know how much money to raise? If you pitch a sophisticated investor, they are always going to ask you, what are you going to do with the money? If I give you money, what are you going to do with it? You can't just say, oh, I'm going to make my company big and make you more money. They're going to want to itemize every single dollar spent. They want to know, like, are you putting money into assets or activities that have the opportunity disaggregated to on its own generate 10 times the value? Like if I give you, Eugene, $300,000 and you said, oh, my company is a software company and I'm going to be selling data to the government. And I really need your $300,000 to buy myself a Lamborghini. Yeah. I'm going to look at that asset and ask myself, okay, if you're going to put money into that Lamborghini, and we fast forward 5 years from now, and maybe your company is going to get acquired, are they going to look at the asset owned by your company called the Lamborghini and say, I'm going to pay 10 times what you paid for that Lamborghini? Obviously not, because it's a depreciating asset. So we don't want money going into depreciating assets. So kind of like we looked at with the financial model, you got to figure out how much capital to raise. And you have to project how much money you're going to make from your business. How much revenue are you going to generate? Progressively, more and more investors want business models that make sense, that are going to generate cash. We don't want to invest in companies that are dependent on raising equity financing. Do you know what happens? Totally fine if you don't know the answer to this. I'll tell you what the answer is.
1 minute is all.
Yeah, no problem. Okay,
Companies that depend.
that's right. Like if I give you 1,000,
I mean, what happens if those companies, they all suddenly say no to you, then how is your company going to last?
okay, yeah, good point. No, excellent point. But here's another perspective. Okay, this is all about how equity works. Have you heard of something called dilution? Okay, so I'll tell you what it is. So when you figure out how much ownership you have in a business, when you invest in it, if it's a startup, you're not buying equity from the founder. Like the founder owns 100% shares in a business and you want to buy 50% of the company, or you want to invest in the business and the company needs the money to grow. It's not going to be a situation where the founder is selling you his, her, their 50% of ownership, his or their ownership of the company, because then the money would go into the founder. So what instead happens to keep the money in the business, they have to issue new shares. And the way that you calculate your share ownership is you take the total amount of shares that you own divided by the total number of outstanding shares. So let's say that you own 100,000 shares in a company and the company only, you as a founder. Okay, so you're a founder, you own 100,000 shares. The company has issued 100,000 shares. So you're trying to think, okay, how much percentage do I own? So I own 100,000 shares in this company, but the company only has 100,000 shares outstanding. So I own 100% of the shares. So I own 100% of the company. So then what happens is if you need to raise money, you might raise $1 million, but you'll have to issue new shares from the company. You're not selling your equity because then the money would go to you. The company itself is issuing new shares. So it's going to issue 100,000 new shares to an investor that's giving you $1 million. So now you still only own 100,000 shares, but now there's 200,000 shares outstanding because you just invented new shares and gave them to somebody else. So you have just been diluted 50% because 100,000 over 200,000 is 50%. And so the reason why VCs don't like putting money into companies that are so dependent on constantly going to the capital markets because they constantly have to issue new shares and the equity ownership of the investor is going to be diluted every single time they issue new shares. And that's also why we prefer business models that have high gross margins. So they could make money on its own to cover their expenses. They don't constantly have to be selling equity to the capital markets because you're going to get diluted unless you as the investors is buying that equity, putting more and more money into the company, which there's many reasons why you wouldn't want to do that. You just don't want to be too heavily weighted with your portfolio into one particular company versus another. So yeah, that's another thing you have to keep in mind. So yeah, sure. No, go ahead. All questions are smart questions, unless they're unasked. Yeah.
If I, as the founder, own 100,000 shares and I need money, and you said a new set of 100,000 shares can be issued, how are new shares created? In the sense, is it like, printing paper money where just printing stuff out of thin air?
Basically, yeah. If you're the majority shareholder, you get to decide, am I going to have this company, like print out new shares that someone else is going to buy? And when you create new shares, like printing money, and you give it to an investor, then that money's going into the company. It's not going into you personally, unless you sell your own equity, which happens mostly for later stage companies.
Thank you.
So yeah, no problem. Okay, so very important analysis that you have to do in order to figure out how much money are you going to need in the future. And another thing you need to do to communicate to partners that maybe you're giving equity to investors, to yourself, is try to figure out into the future, is my company going to be profitable? Am I going to generate the type of return that I need in order to invest all of my resources into this, my valuable time, my reputation, money, all of this other stuff? So you have to figure out, okay, well, how much money can I possibly make from this company? So I don't know if any of you've seen a financial model before. it can be quite complicated. Like you have your income statement, your balance sheet, your cash flow statement, they all have to interconnect. So you could figure that out. Like you could just research, how do they connect? How do I build it out? The thing that's the most challenging is in creating a financial model. And by the way, financial models are a requirement for any investor to put money into your business, is figuring out your revenue, because that's the unknown factor. You can figure out how much I need to spend in order to pay rent or pay developers or pay employees, but you don't know how much money am I going to make. So that's when you use these different tactics. It's called the top down and the bottom up strategies to figure out how much money you can make. So the top down, that's about looking at the market size. Where's the market going? Is it growing? Is it contracting? Am I going to get a higher percentage of the market, or am I riding a rising tide? I own 1% of the market, but the market itself is growing. So as long as I keep that 1%, then I'm going to grow with it. And then you look at all the basically the external factors. What's happening with the customers? What are they used to paying for a certain product or service? How much can I charge? What are the competition? What are they doing? Are they likely going to be owning more market share, or am I going to be stealing market share away from them? It's the external factors. Then you do your analysis from the bottom up approach. So you're not looking externally at the macro figures, you're looking internally. What does our company have special strategic partnerships? Remember we talked about distribution channel partners? Do we have an unfair advantage in the market? It's another common term you hear coming up. Investors will say to you, what's your unfair advantage in the market? Why you? Like, why is it that your company will be successful? You have to be able to address that. So you, from the bottom up, you look at all of those things. Like what do we have? What is our value proposition? Why is it so compelling that customers will come to us instead of going for alternatives, et cetera, et cetera. And then you kind of meet the two together. You have the external factors and the internal factors giving you the perspective. How much revenue can we expect to generate in the future? And also, very importantly, what's the growth rate going to be? Okay, so you remember the J curve. And I mentioned that as a VC, we disaggregate the capital you're looking to raise and what you plan on spending it on. And so I'm going to give you some insight in terms of activities that absorb capital in a startup and how a VC looks at it. Because remember, as a VC, we want to generate the highest return possible. We want to invest in a company that has the best chances of success. So all of these tactics that we use when we analyze a business, they should also be, if you want to be a sophisticated entrepreneur, you should be analyzing your own business and creating a business model that incorporates these, because it's one and the same thing. Just VCs, the difference is our job is to analyze companies and then structure a company in a way once it's in our portfolio to be successful. Whereas entrepreneurs, they might be experts in data analytics, or they might be experts in software engineering, or they might be experts in agriculture. And so they use their expertise to build a company. They're not necessarily experts in identifying the best business model, structuring deals, structuring the business model, et cetera, et cetera. But an entrepreneur with these powers plus the other advantages they have, that's like a recipe for a killer company. Okay, so when you're thinking of putting your resources into something, money, whatever, this is how VCs look at it. We don't like seeing money going into capital assets, like the car I mentioned, furniture, computers, or whatever, because that all of that stuff depreciates over time. But an asset that we do like are intangible assets that protect your intellectual property, like patents. Because oftentimes that's where your core value is. And you'll know a company's core value when you think, okay, I'm creating this e-commerce back-end security technology that's going to be a ripe acquisition target by Amazon. Why would they buy my company? Well, it's because I created this amazing, innovative algorithm. So that's the core value of your business. They're buying it because of that. So if that's your core value, your intellectual property, then it makes sense to protect that. So that's why we like patents. Product development, I mean, that's kind of in line with what I just said. It's the innovation element to it. Product development is all about creating something. And when you create this new invention, it's going to likely, you know, if it's revenue generating or has some other type of value, the value is greater than the sum of its parts because you combine it together. Leadership, like hiring a CEO, that's similar to hiring sales staff in terms of activities that absorb capital. Like, let's say, for example, you have a software platform. It's an ed tech company, so educational technology, and you're thinking, okay, I want to sell this technology to the Ontario School Board because I know if I do that, they're going to make it mandatory for all the public schools in the province to use my technology. So what an amazing opportunity would it be to hire a former employee who was in procurement at the Ontario School Board because they probably know the ins and outs of the system. They probably have connections there that could bring us into that, you know, very red tape, high barrier, bureaucratic organization. But this could be a double-edged sword type thing. If you don't validate your business model early enough and you hire someone to represent your company and bring you into break through these barriers, and later on, after you've been paying this person, you figure out, you know what, this EdTech platform is much better for families, not really the Ontario School Board, then you would have wasted all this money and effort paying this person who really has no more value to you because you've totally pivoted your business. So leadership can be amazing, but as long as you solidify and validate your business model first. And it's the same with hiring salespeople. And quite frankly, it's the same as marketing as well. It's all related. You need to figure out what your business model is. So this trial and error, lean methodologies, business model canvas kind of stuff to get to the stage where your business model, your value proposition is validated. You know your customer segment, you know who your customer segment is, you know that they're willing to buy from you. If that's the case, that's when you could start doing marketing. Maybe hire a leadership person to break through those barriers for you, and you could hire a sales staff. But if you haven't validated your business model yet, and you pay for marketing, you're going to be wasting money, and you're going to be educating your customer segment in regards to a business that is going to dramatically change. So at that point, you're either thinking, okay, I just wasted all this money marketing a message to this customer segment, and now I have to spend more money to re-educate them, or I have to change my brand, whereas all the other money spent is a complete sunk cost. And likewise with sales. Like if you hire salespeople too early, and all of a sudden these people are out there pounding the pavement and they're not having a success in terms of bringing revenue in. You're not going to know, is it because I hired the wrong salespeople, or are they pushing a business model that doesn't work? And then it's not really their fault. But again, you have wasted money. Oh, okay, short term and medium term. That's yeah, that's it. You know what? Let's not go down that rabbit hole. That's going to open up a whole other can of worms. I probably should have edited that out, but thanks for bringing that up. All right. So, okay, let me tell you something else that's important in terms of what a founder should do and the founder's role. Have any of you heard of a company called Bourbon? Sure, or the drink or whatever. There was a tech company called Bourbon. No? Okay, maybe you'll be more familiar with it since it changed its name to Instagram. So the founder of Instagram, the first iteration of Instagram was a company called Bourbon. And Bourbon was this weird app that allowed you to check into certain locations, share where you are, compete with each other and do all this other weird stuff. And the founder of Bourbon was having a very challenging time scaling. Eugene, have you heard this story? Okay, so the founder, for some weird reason, even though nobody wanted the app, there was like these diehard users, there's about 100 of them that were using it over and over and over again. He was looking at the data, the analytics. And so as a good founder, in terms of getting feedback, not wearing the rose-colored glasses and really wanting to connect and empathize with the customer base, the customer segment, and say, like, how can I add value to you? Like, I'm open ears, I want to adapt, I'm trying to make this a good experience for all of you. He went to those 100 users and he said, why are you using this? Because nobody else wants this thing. And the feedback that he got from those 100 users were, they said, we don't care about this competition thing you have going on. We do not care about this check-in feature. We don't care about huge laundry list of all this stuff they're ramming into this app. But they said, the one really cool thing you have that you added recently is this ability for us to share images. We just like the format, the ease of use, the way you have it all kind of laid out. And so based on that critical insight, the founder of Bourbon went back to the drawing board and scrapped everything, changed the name to Instagram and focused on that one image sharing feature. And then all of a sudden, millions of users started downloading the app. I can't remember either, so it's bad for me more, I think, that I'm talking about it. But anyway, then the rest is history. Within 2 years, it got bought by Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, for $2 billion. Fast forward a number of years later, and now sitting on the balance sheet of what we know as Meta, the value of Instagram is worth $100 billion. And so it was that critical thing. So why am I bringing this up, especially right now, is not just because I'm talking about capital absorbing activities, but I'm also trying to highlight the role and the job of the founder. That individual should be the one at those early stages of the company's development, connecting, trying to sell, trying to get feedback, not hiring someone to do it for you or partnering with someone. Because the founder is the one who knows what the company's capable of, how it can change, how it could adapt. And also he, she, they have the ability to implement those changes as well. How are we doing for time? I feel like we're getting dangerously close to.
I think technically 4:30 is when the next session starts. There might be a break in between.
4:07.
Yeah, it is 4:30. There isn't technically a break, but I imagine people here probably want to ask you more questions after, or even online. So
Okay, let's just we're getting pretty close to the end anyways. Okay, so you know what, I'm just going to conclude it. I threw a ton of information at you, and so I'm going to conclude it and then open it up for questions. And if we have time, you can have a break before the next speaker comes in. So in conclusion, and of course, I'm trying to wrap it and make it relevant to data because it totally is relevant. Data can and should be used for the following: understanding and forecasting the stages of your company's life cycle, and understanding like the peaks and valleys, the J curve that we talked about, the valley of death, scalability. You should also use data, feedback from consumers, surveys, whatever, try to get a sample set of at least 30, I think is the the statistical number when it starts to show relevance. Map out how to increase your shareholder value. Use data, insight to perform evaluation on your company, benchmark where it's at, and then use that insight from doing the valuation to project into the future how your company is going to grow and what you need to get it there. And this isn't just stuff to make your company successful. This is a requirement if you want to get VCs investing. You have to be able to talk along those ways in order for them to take you seriously. Okay, also use data to understand the cash flow risk dynamics and the position of your company, and make sure that you focus on positioning the company in such a way where, like a scientist, like a statistician, you're giving yourself the best probability of success. You're not just thinking one idea, I'm just going to push that law of attraction, think only positive thoughts. You're thinking, okay, I'm going to test this hypothesis. Is it going to work? No? Awesome. Now I have feedback like bourbon to pivot, make an iterative change, and then release a new product or service that could work. And then also use data and your insight to make decisions on how to allocate your resources. Of course, capital is one of them, but then there's time, effort, energy, reputation, and all of that good stuff as well. All right, everyone, thank you so much for being an amazing audience. I really appreciate your attention. Thank you as well to the people on Zoom. Yeah, opening it up for questions if there are any.
Sure. I'll just see if this is a question. All right. Great story. This is again from Katrina. Great story. I think Shopify had a similar experience. They were trying to build a snowboard sales company online and found success in the online shopping platform. Can you talk more about non-technical founders in the tech space? Does it make sense to have a partner to invest, to hire, or does it make sense to have a partner or invest to hire out building the tech?
You know what? Excellent question. This kind of goes back to that other question I mentioned an entrepreneur asked me in a panel. So it is true. VCs like to put money into a company that has a capability to create its own technology, because at least you have someone on the team who understands it, and it's not being held captive by a software developer that wants to make you pay more or something like that. But having said that, you have to be an entrepreneur and answer that question for yourself based on what's best for your business and that business model. And by the way, I talk a lot about what VCs want and how we evaluate companies. A good VC investment is not always synonymous with a successful company. We have this small window based on our fiduciary duties with our investors to put money into. And sometimes there are many companies with great potential to be successful that doesn't fit into. ChargeRequest is one of them. ChargeRequest is not a good VC investment, but in my opinion, a brilliant private equity investment. But I'll save that for another day. Go ahead.
No,
If there's-
just nodding.
Okay.
I hope that answers your question there, Katrina. Any questions from people here? No?
All right. Thanks again, everyone.
No?
Oh, great. Appreciate that. All right. So yeah, Eugene.
Yeah, thanks everyone who's online. Katrina, I hope that answered your question. And yeah, we're gonna take off, and the next session is just the closing remarks at 4:30. Thanks.